Since you're not joining the family trip, please deep clean the house before the realtor visits. My daughter-in-law left that card beside my plate at Thanksgiving dinner. Right between the cranberry sauce and the pumpkin pie, I had spent 6 hours baking from scratch. Nobody said a word. Not my son. Not my granddaughter. Not even my sister-in-law sitting across the table pretending to study her wine glass like it contained the answer to life itself. I stood there for a moment holding my casserole dish against my chest while the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the dining room that used to belong to my husband. The room looked beautiful. I had polished the silver that morning until my hands ached. Candles flickered softly along the center of the mahogany table Walter bought 30 years ago after his first big promotion at the insurance firm. Outside, snow drifted gently over the backyard deck, covering the patio furniture in white like frosting on a wedding cake. It should have felt warm. It should have felt like family. Instead, it felt like I had accidentally walked into a stranger's home where everyone knew a joke except me. Evelyn smiled when she noticed I had finally read the card. "We thought it would be easier this way," she said lightly as she adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored sweater. Her diamond bracelet caught the candlelight every time she moved her wrist. "The realtor is coming by while we're in Colorado next week, and since you'll already be here," she let the sentence trail off with a small shrug, like asking a 68-year-old widow to scrub baseboards for a showing was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel cleared his throat beside her, but kept cutting his turkey into careful little squares without looking at me. My son had always done that when he was uncomfortable. Even as a little boy, he used to stare at his plate whenever he knew he'd done something wrong. I slowly placed the casserole dish on the sideboard and took my seat at the far end of the table where Walter used to sit beside me every Thanksgiving. My chair suddenly felt too small, too far away from everyone else. Sophie, my 16-year-old granddaughter, glanced at me with wide, nervous eyes before quickly looking down at her phone. The silence stretched so long I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Evelyn reached for the gravy boat first. "Margaret, would you mind also organizing the downstairs storage room before the realtor comes?" she asked pleasantly. "It still has a lot of your old things in it." "Your old things." I folded my napkin carefully onto my lap so they wouldn't see my hands trembling. Last year, that downstairs room had been Walter's workshop. The year before that, it held our Christmas decorations and family photo albums. Now apparently, it was just clutter standing between Evelyn and whatever version of the future she had planned for this house. I looked around the table slowly, at the expensive wine glasses, at the catered floral centerpiece Evelyn insisted on ordering because mine looked dated, at the family photos lining the walls that I had personally framed over 4 decades of marriage. Every inch of this house carried my fingerprints, my memories, my life. And suddenly I realized something that settled cold and heavy into my chest. Everyone at this table already knew about the realtor. Everyone except me. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of polished silverware and careful conversations that sounded rehearsed, as though everyone at the table had memorized their lines before I arrived. Evelyn talked cheerfully about ski lessons in Aspen while Daniel nodded along beside her, occasionally checking his phone under the tablecloth when he thought nobody noticed. Sophie barely touched her mashed potatoes. Every few minutes, she glanced at me with the same anxious expression people wear in hospital waiting rooms when they already know the doctor is carrying bad news. I forced myself to eat 2 bites of turkey even though my stomach felt tight and hollow. The gravy tasted too salty. Or maybe it was just the tears I refused to let fall. Evelyn laughed suddenly at something her brother said about airport security delays, and for one strange second, I felt like a ghost sitting among the living. Nobody asked me whether I wanted dessert. Nobody asked whether I had plans for next week. They had already decided my role in this family without consulting me. I was the elderly woman who stayed behind to dust shelves while everyone else flew to Colorado for matching holiday photos beside a fireplace in some luxury lodge. After dinner, I carried plates into the kitchen automatically, the same way I had after every family holiday for the last 42 years. The dishwasher hummed softly while cold November wine rattled the kitchen windows above the sink. Evelyn followed me in holding her wine glass by the stem. "Oh, Margaret, do not worry about cleaning tonight," she said sweetly. "You can start after we leave Tuesday morning. The realtor wants everything spotless before the first showing." Showing. The word echoed unpleasantly inside my head. I dried my hands slowly with a dish towel and turned toward her. How long has the house been on the market? I asked quietly. Evelyn blinked once, clearly surprised I had asked directly. Well, technically it is not listed yet, she replied carefully. We are just preparing. We. Not Daniel and I. Not the family. Just we. I looked past her through the doorway into the dining room, where my late husband's portrait still hung above the fireplace. Walter had built this home board by board after returning from long days at the office. Every spring, he planted tulips along the front walkway because he said a house should greet people warmly before they even stepped inside. The year before he passed away, we spent 3 weekends repainting the guest bedroom together because he insisted future grandchildren would need a cheerful place to stay. And now strangers were apparently coming to tour it while I scrubbed floors behind them. Daniel finally wandered into the kitchen with his sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. Mom, he began awkwardly. We were going to tell you after the holidays. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes exactly the way he had when he was 12 years old, and crashed my car backing out of the driveway too early. The house is just a lot to manage now, he continued. Especially for you alone. Alone. That word settled heavier than anything else he had said all evening. Not once had he asked whether I wanted to leave. Not once had he wondered if perhaps the only thing keeping me standing after Walter died was waking up each morning surrounded by the life we built together. Evelyn stepped closer and lowered her voice as though offering kindness. There are some beautiful senior communities near Hartford, she said, with activities and transportation and little cottages. Little cottages. I stared at her perfectly polished smile and suddenly understood something that chilled me far more than the snow outside. They were not simply planning a vacation. They were planning a future without me in it. I barely slept that night. The house sounded different after everyone left, as though the walls themselves had overheard the conversation at dinner and no longer recognized the people living inside them. Around 2 in the morning, I walked downstairs wrapped in Walter's old wool cardigan and stood alone in the kitchen drinking chamomile tea beside the dim stove light. Snow continued falling outside in slow, heavy sheets, covering the backyard completely. Walter used to love nights like this. He always said fresh snow made the whole world quieter, gentler somehow. But standing there alone, all I could think about was how easily my family had discussed removing me from my own life, as though rearranging furniture. The next morning, I woke before sunrise out of habit. For 40 years, Thanksgiving weekend meant leftover turkey sandwiches, football playing softly in the den, and Walter humming Christmas songs while untangling lights from the basement storage bins. Instead, I found Evelyn sitting at the dining room table with her laptop open and a stack of papers spread neatly beside her coffee mug. She looked up quickly when she heard my footsteps. You are up early, she said with a smile that disappeared too fast to feel genuine. I nodded toward the paperwork. What is all that? For half a second, her expression tightened. Then she casually flipped one page face down. Just travel confirmations and house paperwork, she replied. Nothing exciting. Daniel entered moments later wearing sweatpants and carrying his phone. The second he noticed the papers, he stopped walking. A strange silence passed between them so quickly most people would have missed it. But mothers notice things. We notice the glance between husband and wife when they are hiding bad news. We notice the way voices change when conversations stop too suddenly. Morning, Mom, Daniel said carefully. Coffee. I told him yes, and he busied himself at the counter while Evelyn slowly gathered the papers into a leather folder. One sheet slipped loose and drifted onto the hardwood floor near my feet. Evelyn reached for it immediately, but not before my eyes caught the logo across the top. Hartford Premier Realty. My chest tightened. Underneath the logo sat a photograph of my house. My house, taken from the front lawn with the maple trees glowing orange from early autumn. Beneath the photo were the words, spacious, colonial, perfect for growing families. Evelyn snatched the page too quickly and forced a little laugh. That is just a draft, she said. Nothing official. Daniel turned around sharply from the coffee machine. Evelyn. His voice carried warning now. She pressed her lips together. Well, she was going to find out eventually. Find out. Not discuss. Not decide together. Just find out. I pulled out a chair slowly and sat down because my knees suddenly felt weak beneath me. The dining room smelled faintly like cinnamon candles and fresh coffee, but underneath it all lingered the sharp, cold feeling of betrayal. When exactly were you planning to tell me my home was being listed for sale? I asked quietly. Daniel rubbed his forehead like a man exhausted by inconvenience instead of guilt. Mom, please do not make this harder than it has to be. Harder. I stared at him across the same table where I once helped him build school science projects and wrap homemade Christmas gifts for his teachers. Your father built this house with his own hands, I whispered. I buried him 8 months ago. Daniel finally looked at me then, but there was impatience in his eyes now. And that is exactly why you should not be here alone anymore. Evelyn folded her hands together neatly on the table. The senior cottages are beautiful, Margaret. They even have transportation to grocery stores and social activities. Social activities. As though loneliness could be solved with bingo nights and shuttle buses. I looked toward the hallway where Walter's coat still hung on the wooden rack beside the front door. Nobody had asked me if I was ready to leave him behind. That afternoon, after Daniel and Evelyn left to meet friends for lunch, I wandered through the house carrying an old dust cloth in my hands without actually cleaning anything. I moved from room to room slowly, touching the backs of chairs and picture frames the way people touch gravestones in old cemeteries. The house felt nervous somehow, like it was waiting for me to finally understand what everyone else already knew. In the family room, Walter's reading glasses still rested beside his favorite leather recliner exactly where he left them the night before his heart attack. 8 months later, I still could not bring myself to move them. Sunlight filtered softly through the bay windows, landing across the hardwood floors we refinished together one summer when Daniel was in college. Walter spent 3 straight weekends on his knees sanding every inch by hand because he said shortcuts never lasted. I could still hear his voice teasing me whenever I complained about the mess. One day this house will outlive both of us, he used to say with a smile. Take care of her, Maggie. Nobody else ever called me Maggie. Around 3 o'clock, I carried a box of old Christmas decorations upstairs from the basement and stopped outside Daniel's old bedroom. The door stood half open now because Evelyn had turned the room into a home office after they moved in temporarily 2 years ago to help me after Walter passed. At least that was the explanation in the beginning. Temporary slowly became permanent. One closet became 2. Then their furniture replaced ours piece by piece until sometimes I felt like a guest wandering through my own memories. Walter warned me once. I remembered it suddenly while standing there in the quiet hallway. It was 2 summers ago after one of Evelyn's tense little comments during a 4th of July barbecue. She had smiled sweetly while telling guests the house would eventually need modernizing once it belonged to the younger generation. That night, Walter sat beside me on the back porch long after everyone left. The citronella candle flickered between us while fireworks burst faintly in the distance over neighboring towns. Promise me something, he said quietly. Do not let anyone push you out of this house after I am gone. I laughed at the time because the idea seemed impossible. Daniel was our son. Evelyn could be difficult, yes, but family was family. Walter only squeezed my hand tighter. People change when property gets involved, he said, especially people who think they deserve something they did not build. Standing there now in the upstairs hallway, I felt those words settle heavily into my chest. I walked into the master bedroom and opened Walter's side of the closet for the first time in weeks. His winter coats still hung neatly pressed beside rows of polished shoes. The familiar scent of cedar and his old cologne lingered faintly in the air. My eyes drifted toward the small fireproof lockbox on the top shelf where Walter kept insurance papers and tax records. For a moment, I simply stared at it while snow tapped softly against the bedroom windows. Then, very slowly, I pulled the box down onto the bedspread. Inside were folders arranged in Walter's precise handwriting. Home insurance, property taxes, trust documents. My fingers paused on the last one. Trust documents. I do not know what made me open it right then. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation, or maybe somewhere deep inside. I finally realized my husband had seen this coming long before I ever did. I sat on the edge of the bed with the folder resting unopened in my lap for nearly 10 minutes before finally sliding the papers free. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the backyard covered in a smooth blanket of white that reflected pale afternoon light into the bedroom. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the radiator beneath the window. Walter always kept the heat slightly too high in winter because he worried about my hands getting cold. Even now, months after losing him, The warmth still felt like something he had left behind to protect me. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. Legal language, property descriptions, banking information. But halfway through the packet, I found a signed amendment dated 6 months before Walter died. My eyes moved slowly across the page once, then twice, then a third time because I genuinely thought I had misunderstood what I was reading. The house was not jointly transferred to Daniel after Walter's death the way everyone apparently believed. The property remained entirely protected inside a family trust controlled by one person only. Me, sole trustee, sole beneficiary during my lifetime. No sale permitted without my written authorization. I lowered the papers carefully into my lap while my heartbeat thudded heavily in the quiet room. Walter knew. Somehow, long before his heart gave out in that hospital bed, he had already seen the cracks forming beneath our family. A soft knock startled me. I looked up to find Sophie standing hesitantly in the doorway holding a mug of tea with both hands. "Dad said you skipped lunch," she said quietly. I forced a small smile and motioned for her to come inside. She crossed the room slowly and handed me the mug before noticing the documents spread across the bedspread. Her expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Fear. Teenagers are terrible liars because their emotions reach their faces before they can stop them. "You know about this, do you not?" I asked gently. Sophie sat beside me on the edge of the mattress, twisting the sleeve of her oversized sweatshirt between nervous fingers. For several seconds, she stared at the carpet without speaking. Then finally she whispered, "Grandma, I did not know how to tell you." Something inside me tightened painfully, but I kept my voice calm. "Tell me what?" Sophie swallowed hard. "Mom and Dad have been talking about selling the house since summer." Summer. Walter had only been gone 3 months by then. Sophie wiped quickly at her eyes before continuing. "Mom said it was wasteful for you to keep living here alone when the property value is so high now." Property value. Not memories. Not family. History. Just square footage and resale potential. Sophie looked up at me miserably. "Grandma, I swear I wanted to say something earlier." I placed my hand gently over hers. "Did your father agree with all this?" She hesitated too long before answering. "At first, no. But Mom kept saying it would be better for everyone. She told him you would eventually need assisted living anyway." Assisted living. The phrase landed like ice water in my chest. Sophie reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt and slowly pulled out her phone. "There is something else you should probably see." She opened a family group chat and handed me the screen. My eyes moved over message after message. Realtor appointments. Renovation ideas. Discussions about converting the master bedroom into a larger nursery. Then one line from Evelyn sent 3 weeks earlier. "Once we get Margaret settled somewhere smaller, this place will finally feel like ours." I stared at those words until they blurred slightly. Ours. Not once in any of the messages did anyone refer to it as my home. Sophie's voice trembled beside me. "Grandma, they were planning to take pictures for the listing while everyone was on the ski trip because Mom said it would be easier if you stayed out of the way." I closed my eyes for one brief moment. Then I looked back down at Walter's signature on the trust documents resting beside me. And for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I stopped feeling hurt. I started feeling awake. The next morning, I woke before anyone else and sat alone at the kitchen table with Walter's trust documents spread neatly beside my coffee cup. Gray winter light filtered through the windows, turning the snow outside pale silver. For the first time in months, the house no longer felt heavy with grief. It felt alert. Alive somehow, as though Walter had quietly stepped back into the room beside me and whispered, "Pay attention, Maggie." I traced my fingertips over his signature again. Even after 42 years of marriage, seeing his handwriting still made my chest ache. Walter always signed documents with slow, careful strokes, like a man who understood that important things deserved patience. Around 7 o'clock, I heard Evelyn's heels clicking down the staircase. She entered the kitchen wearing white cashmere and carrying her phone already pressed to her ear, speaking softly about airport pickup times and ski rentals. The moment she noticed the documents beside me, her expression flickered almost imperceptibly before smoothing back into that polished smile she wore for neighbors and charity luncheons. "You are up early," she said brightly after ending the call. "Could not sleep," I replied calmly. I lifted my coffee cup and took a slow sip while watching her move around the kitchen gathering protein bars and travel snacks for the trip. She hummed softly under her breath, like a woman preparing for vacation without a single concern in the world. Daniel came downstairs a few minutes later looking tired and distracted. "The car service is picking us up at 9, he said while scrolling through emails on his phone. Then he glanced toward me awkwardly. "Mom, you sure you will be okay here alone for the week?" Alone. The word no longer sounded painful. Now it sounded useful. "I will manage," I answered quietly. Evelyn zipped up one of the expensive silver suitcases standing near the mudroom entrance. "The realtor may stop by Thursday afternoon," she added casually. "Just make sure the downstairs guest room stays tidy." I looked directly at her for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner. "I am sure the house will be exactly as I want it," I said softly. Something in my tone made her pause. Only for a second, but I saw it. A flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before she quickly looked away. After breakfast, Daniel carried luggage out to the driveway while snow crunched beneath his boots. Sophie lingered near the front hallway pretending to search for her headphones. When Evelyn stepped outside to answer another phone call, Sophie moved quickly toward me. "Grandma," she whispered nervously, "please be careful." I touched her cheek gently. "Do not worry about me, sweetheart." Her eyes searched mine as though realizing for the first time that I was no longer the confused, grieving widow everyone thought they could quietly move aside. At exactly 9:12, the black SUV pulled away from the curb carrying my son, my daughter-in-law, and the life they thought they were inheriting. I stood at the front window until the taillights disappeared beyond the snowy maple trees lining our street. Then the house fell completely silent. No footsteps overhead. No television murmuring from the den. No Evelyn giving instructions to delivery drivers or complaining about storage space. Just silence. I walked slowly into Walter's old study and opened the bottom desk drawer where he kept personal contacts written carefully inside a leather address book. My fingers stopped on one familiar name. Richard Bennett, estate attorney. I picked up the phone beside the desk and dialed the number from memory before I could second-guess myself. Richard answered on the second ring, his voice older but steady. "Margaret," he said with genuine surprise. "It has been a while." I stared out the study window toward the frozen backyard while snow drifted softly from the roofline. "Richard," I said calmly, "I think it is time I finally understood exactly what my husband left behind." Richard arrived the following morning just after 10, carrying a leather briefcase dusted with snowflakes. Time had silvered his hair and softened the lines around his eyes, but his handshake still carried the same quiet steadiness I remembered from years of estate meetings at our dining room table, while Walter poured bourbon into crystal glasses nearby. The moment Richard stepped inside, his gaze moved slowly across the front hallway, as though he could still feel Walter's presence lingering in the walls. "Your husband trusted very few people completely," he said gently while removing his coat. "You were one of them. I was another." I led him into Walter's study where morning light stretched pale across the bookshelves. The room smelled faintly of old paper, cedarwood, and the coffee I had brewed before sunrise. Richard opened his briefcase carefully and spread several folders across the desk beside the trust documents I had found. "Margaret," he began quietly, "Walter made very specific arrangements during the last year of his life." I sat across from him with my hands folded tightly in my lap while snow drifted outside the windows. Richard adjusted his glasses and slid one document toward me. The house, the investment accounts, and several additional assets were all placed inside an irrevocable family trust. I nodded slowly. "I saw that." Richard's expression tightened slightly. "What you probably did not see is the clause your husband insisted we include after one particular meeting with Daniel and Evelyn last spring." My chest tightened. "What happened?" Richard hesitated briefly before answering. Evelyn repeatedly pressured Walter to transfer the deed directly to Daniel while he was still alive. She claimed it would simplify future inheritance taxes. I stared at him in stunned silence. "Walter never mentioned any of this to me." Richard continued carefully. "After they left that evening, Walter told me he no longer trusted their intentions. He believed there was a strong possibility you would eventually be pressured to leave the home entirely." Outside, wind brushed softly against the frozen tree branches lining the backyard. I suddenly remembered that strange, quiet expression Walter wore during his final months whenever Evelyn talked about renovations or future resale values. At the time, I thought it was exhaustion from chemotherapy appointments and heart medications. Now I understood it differently. He had been watching his own family calculate life after his death before he was even gone. Richard opened another folder. There is more. He handed me a notarized letter written entirely in Walter's handwriting. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded the paper. Maggie, if you are reading this, then unfortunately I was right to worry. Please remember something important. You built this home beside me every single day for 42 years. Nobody has the right to erase you from it. I pressed my lips together tightly as emotion rose unexpectedly into my throat. Richard waited respectfully while I composed myself. What happens now? I finally asked. Richard leaned back calmly in his chair. Legally, Daniel and Evelyn have no ownership claim whatsoever. They are residents in a trust-controlled property entirely under your authority. I looked around Walter's study slowly. The framed fishing photographs. The shelves lined with history books. The old brass desk lamp Walter repaired twice instead of replacing because he hated wasting perfectly good things. This house suddenly no longer felt like something slipping away from me. It felt protected. Richard closed the final folder and met my eyes directly. Margaret, your husband spent months making sure nobody could quietly remove you from your own life. He paused before adding softly, the only question now is what you want to do next. I looked out the study window toward the long driveway where fresh snow remained untouched except for Richard's footprints leading to the front door. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt something stronger than grief settling inside me. Control. Over the next 3 days, the house slowly began to feel like mine again. Not theirs. Mine. I moved carefully through each room with a quiet sense of purpose I had not felt since before Walter's funeral. Every morning, I opened the curtains myself and let winter sunlight spill across the hardwood floors while classical music played softly from the kitchen radio. I cooked only for one now. Simple meals Walter always loved. Tomato soup with grilled cheese. Pot roast with carrots. Fresh coffee brewed slowly instead of rushed between other people's schedules. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Richard handled everything with calm efficiency. By Tuesday afternoon, the locks had been legally changed. By Wednesday morning, the realtor received formal notice that the property could not be listed or shown under any circumstances without trustee authorization. Richard also drafted residency termination notices for Daniel and Evelyn, giving them 30 days to remove their belongings from the home. When he asked whether I truly wished to proceed, I answered without hesitation. Walter already made the decision. I told him quietly. I am simply honoring it. That evening, Sophie called from Colorado while the rest of the family attended some expensive holiday dinner at their resort. I could hear muffled music and laughter behind her voice. Mom is furious, she whispered quickly. The realtor called Dad this morning. I stood at the kitchen sink watching snow collect along the backyard fence. And how did your father react? Sophie hesitated, confused. Mom told him there had to be some mistake with the paperwork. A sad little smile touched my lips. Evelyn had always believed confidence could replace truth if spoken loudly enough. Grandma, Sophie asked softly, are you okay? I looked around the kitchen slowly. The yellow ceramic bowl Walter bought me during our trip to Vermont still sat beside the stove. His old flannel coat remained hanging near the mudroom door. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood polish. For the first time in months, nothing inside these walls felt temporary anymore. Yes, I answered honestly. I think I finally am. After the call ended, I walked upstairs to the guest room Evelyn once insisted on redesigning into a yoga studio. Her expensive exercise equipment still filled half the space beside unopened storage boxes she never bothered unpacking completely because she assumed permanence was guaranteed. I stood there quietly for a long moment before beginning to sort through their belongings. Not angrily, not dramatically, simply carefully. Winter coats folded into bins. Shoes arranged neatly by the wall. Kitchen appliances packed back into original boxes. Every movement felt calm and deliberate, like restoring order after months of noise. By Friday evening, nearly all of Daniel and Evelyn's possessions had been relocated into a climate-controlled storage unit Richard recommended downtown. I kept only Sophie's things untouched inside her bedroom exactly as she left them. That night, snow fell again while I sat alone in Walter's study reading beside the fire. Around 9:30, my phone lit up with photos Evelyn had posted online from Colorado. Matching cream-colored sweaters. wine glasses raised beside a roaring lodge fireplace, captions about gratitude and family blessings. In every photograph, Daniel smiled stiffly while Evelyn leaned possessively against his shoulder. I studied the images quietly before setting my phone face down on the desk. Then I looked toward the front hallway where two sealed envelopes rested neatly on the entry table waiting for their return. One contained the formal legal notices prepared by Richard. The other held Walter's handwritten letter. Outside, wind moved softly through the dark maple trees surrounding the house we built together. And for the first time since Walter died, I no longer feared what came next. They returned late Sunday afternoon, just as another snowstorm began rolling across Connecticut. I watched their black SUV pull into the driveway from the front window beside Walter's old piano while soft jazz played quietly through the living room speakers. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and fresh bread cooling on the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, I had decorated the Christmas tree exactly the way Walter, and I always liked it without Evelyn rearranging everything into color-coordinated perfection for social media photos. Warm white lights glowed softly across handmade ornaments collected over 4 decades of marriage. The house finally looked like home again. Outside, Daniel stepped out of the SUV first, stretching stiffly after the long drive from the airport. Evelyn climbed out behind him wearing an expensive cream-colored coat and carrying shopping bags from Aspen boutiques hooked over both wrists. Sophie followed more slowly, her eyes immediately drifting toward the front porch where she noticed something the others had not yet seen. The keypad lock beside the front door had been replaced. I watched confusion spread across Daniel's face as he punched in the old code. Nothing happened. He tried again, then again harder. Evelyn frowned impatiently beside him while snowflakes collected in her hair. A moment later, Daniel pulled out his phone and called me. I let it ring twice before answering calmly. "Mom," he said sharply, "the front door is not opening." I looked around the living room slowly before responding. That would be because the locks were changed on Thursday. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Then Evelyn's voice burst loudly through the phone in the background. What does she mean the locks were changed? I walked toward the front entrance without hurrying and opened the door just enough to look out at them standing beneath the porch light. Snow drifted between us in slow white spirals. Daniel looked exhausted. Evelyn looked furious. Sophie looked relieved. "What is going on?" Daniel asked. I handed him the larger envelope first. "Your attorney can explain the legal details," I said quietly. Evelyn stepped forward immediately, trying to snatch the papers from his hand, but Daniel pulled them back instinctively as his eyes scanned the first page. I watched the exact moment confusion turned into shock. "Resident termination notice?" he whispered. "Mom, the house was never yours to sell," I replied calmly. Evelyn's face drained of color beneath the porch light. "That is ridiculous," she snapped quickly. "Walter wanted this home to stay in the family." I held her gaze steadily. "It did stay in the family. You simply misunderstood who the owner was." Daniel looked up slowly now, genuine disbelief written across his face. "You mean Dad never transferred the deed?" "No," I answered softly. "Your father protected me before he died because he knew exactly what was happening." I handed Daniel the second envelope then. "He left you something else too." Snow crunched beneath their shoes while Daniel opened Walter's handwritten letter with trembling fingers. As he read silently, his entire posture seemed to collapse inward. I could almost see memories hitting him one by one. The backyard treehouse Walter built when he was 8. The summer evenings painting fences together. The years his father spent turning this house into a home long before property values and resale plans entered the conversation. Evelyn folded her arms tightly against the cold. "So what now?" she asked bitterly. "You are really throwing your own son out into the snow." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No, Evelyn. You did that yourselves the moment you decided I belonged somewhere else." The wind moved softly through the pine trees lining the driveway while silence settled over the porch. Finally, Sophie stepped forward carrying her suitcase and stopped beside me near the doorway. "Grandma," she said quietly, "is my room still here?" I felt something warm loosen inside my chest for the first time in nearly a year. I opened the door wider and smiled gently. "Of course it is, sweetheart." Then I stepped aside and let her come home.